I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Monday, January 15th. We begin in the lobby of an overfilled Montreal emergency hospital, where, in pain and far away from home, former Cree Grand Chief Matthew Mukash was forced to spend 4 days waiting for a room. Maricela Amador explains.
To come here and to be waiting in a ER lobby for, up to 4 days is incredibly intense. And for my grandfather, we just expected to have compassion and care just like any other patient would. But I didn't see that.
That's because when Jade Mukash and her grandfather, Matthew Mukash, left their community of Wupmuxtu and arrived at the Montreal General Hospital on January 7th, there were no more rooms available. Matthew has been sick and experiencing worsening pain. He chose to speak Cree to his son, Picasso Mukash, who translated.
So it's very busy here. New people arriving regularly. Some are even under the influence. Some are aggressive. And some have even wanted to fight. That's what I've seen.
After some tests, doctors told them that he was going to be admitted to the hospital, so he was moved from an examination room into the ER lobby, along with countless others waiting for care.
For us to speak up about what my grandfather's going through, it's not because we wanted special treatment for him, as former Grand Chief and Chief of his community. It's just, we know that with that title, we're able to speak for other people, and that's what's important to us.
A crisis is underway in the province, with certain emergency rooms reaching over 200% capacity. In a statement, a representative from the Montreal General Hospital acknowledged the issues of overcrowding and long wait times, and said the overcrowding in ERs can be explained, among other things, by a record number of patients occupying our beds while waiting to be transferred elsewhere in the network, and by a shortage of manpower. Right now, the emergency room of the Montreal General is at 145% overcapacity.
I'm very concerned because I don't seem to be treated with any immediacy to find a room to be admitted to here in the hospital.
In December, the Quebec government adopted a controversial sweeping health reform law. It centralizes the healthcare system's decision-making under Health Quebec. The government said that it was intended to make the system more efficient.
I just kept thinking about my grandfather, and to be already sent out from his home community to a hospital is already difficult enough. And to see, the population just going through so much is really intense.
In a statement, Quebec Indigenous Affairs Minister Ian Lafreniere told APTN that he was following the Mukash situation closely and said, "Since I was informed, I have asked my team to contact Minister of Health Christian Dubé's team to obtain more information on the situation."
I've thought a lot about how Native people and Inuit could and should be treated better, especially the sick. It's difficult to be sick. I have been sick before, and I've had surgery before.
On January 11th, Matthew was transferred to a hotel near the hospital until a room is finally available. Maricela Amador, APTN National News, Montreal.
The Labrador inquiry into Innu and the child protection system is set to resume. Formal hearings are scheduled for the end of this month. They'll take place in Sheshatshiu and Natwashish. Over 5 days, witnesses will testify about health and well-being, Innu history, and the impact of child welfare on communities. The Innu say youth in provincial care lost their language and culture, with some dying by suicide. Brian Harvey is lead executive officer with the inquiry. He says 6 Innu deaths will be investigated.
By investigating these 6 specific cases of tragedy, there will be an opportunity not only to provide, as you can imagine, the families have had questions about what happened to their children. So, of course, we're going to do what we can to answer those questions. But it's also hoped that by examining these 6 very different tragedies, the commissioners will be able to identify systemic issues that had a role to play in their tragedies.
I'm Dennis Ward, host of Face to Face. Coming up on our next episode, I'll be sitting down with the first First Nations premier of a province in Canada, Wab Kinew. We'll be discussing his rise to the top political job in Manitoba and the huge expectations some have following his historic victory. Tune in Tuesday on APTN or listen to the Face to Face podcast. Download and subscribe on your favorite player.
Now we return to a story we brought you last brief, that of a cemetery thought to be on the grounds of a former orphanage in Winnipeg. And as we'll hear from Sav Jonza, the discovery has raised questions about what happens next.
The recent discovery of an unmarked cemetery belonging to a former orphanage in Winnipeg is raising concern. The orphanage, called Asile Rocheau, is believed to have buried some of the bodies of infants and children who died in their care on their former grounds between 1904 and 1948. It's believed over 1,200 to 2,000 children died during the 4 decades of its operation. We turn to Kimberly Murray for her reaction. She's Canada's special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves.
It's very common that there's mass unmarked graves in relation to all kinds of institutions across the country.
Murray points to Ireland, where the remains of children have been found on the grounds of other former Catholic orphanages.
We know that people died at these institutions. We know that children died at orphanages. So the question is, where were they buried? We know that Canada didn't pay to send children back to First Nations or their Indigenous communities. And so they were buried somewhere.
Records and sources contradict whether the human remains were moved after the orphanage closed. Murray says Indigenous leadership and communities should work with the current owners of the land where the cemetery is believed to be to have it searched properly.
There needs to be transparency to the search and accountability to Indigenous communities and any other community that may have had children taken to that orphanage.
Sav Jonza, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Note that the National Indian Residential School Crisis Line is available for survivors and others in need of support. Their number 1-866-925-4419. To Edmonton, where temperatures plunged to the minus 30s over the weekend. Now Mayor Amarjeet Sohi says homelessness there has hit a breaking point. His comments come not long after Edmonton police dismantled 8 outdoor encampments the city deemed high risk. Mayor Sohi says the number of people falling into homelessness has exceeded the capacity of the social service system. He says he'll put forth a motion today to declare a housing and homelessness emergency. And finally, federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was in Winnipeg last week. Seen by some to be in pre-election campaign mode, Poilievre was asked at a press event about searching Winnipeg area landfills for the remains of Indigenous women.
We think that every effort needs to be made to find the remains of murdered and missing Indigenous women and to protect Indigenous women from future violence. We also want criminal justice reforms that will ensure that First Nations and Indigenous people are safe and protected, just as all Canadians are, so we never have tragedies like this again.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Monday, January 15th. I'm Rick Harp.